The moment the ATLAS survey flagged the anomaly, I knew we were facing something unprecedented. The trajectory of the interstellar visitor, now designated 3IATLAS, refused to obey gravity as we know it. No natural outgassing, no pressure from solar radiation, no jets, no mass loss, nothing. Yet the object accelerated smoothly, consistently, by a factor 10 greater than the unexplained push that baffled us with Oumuamua years ago. That alone was enough to take this object out of the category of cosmic debris and place it into the realm of intentional motion. I examined the data frame by frame, the curve of its inbound arc, the subtle shift in its heliocentric velocity, the impossible correction it performed near the ecliptic plane, like a probe adjusting its path, not a rock tumbling helplessly through space. Even when my colleagues pushed for a more conservative interpretation, every simulation, every model, every revised dynamic told me the same story. This thing was acting. The first shock came when we removed all conventional forces from the equation, and the anomaly didn't disappear. It sharpened. The acceleration wasn't noise. It was a signature, and its consistency indicated design. When nature does something unusual, it wobbles, fluctuates, decays. 3IATLAS did none of that. Its stability was almost arrogant, as if announcing, "I am not a product of chaos." While the public received a sanitized announcement of the discovery, we began an aggressive observational campaign using every instrument capable of reaching for it. JWST contributed infrared and spectroscopic data. The refurbished Arecibo array bounced radar pulses into the void, pushing the limits of its new infrastructure. The result, if I hadn't seen the raw numbers myself, I would have dismissed as science fiction. 3I/ATLAS wasn't smooth, spherical, elongated, or even irregular in any natural sense. It possessed intentional asymmetry, a geometry that reminded me of engineered stealth technology where shape is chosen for purpose, not formed by accident. More alarming was its density profile. Sections within it registered far above the theoretical limits of naturally occurring elements. The readings suggested islands of matter compressed beyond any astrophysical expectation, neither neutron star fragments nor any familiar exotic substance. It was as if someone had woven pockets of impossible material into the structure, each one behaving like an anchor, stabilizing the object's internal framework. Then came the signal. A nearly invisible whisper, radio, but not quite, gravitational in flavor, but too faint for conventional classification, emerging as 3IATLAS grazed perihelion. If its creators intended to cloak it, they failed because the pattern betrayed intelligence. It repeated with mathematical discipline, then folded into layers like a recursive key hiding its own encryption. For 3 nights I barely slept, parsing the structure of the pulses, searching for any familiar encoding logic. What surfaced was not a greeting, not a warning, not coordinates. It was an algorithm. At first I thought it was merely describing orbital mechanics, a kind of onboard telemetry bleeding through unintended noise. But the deeper we dug, the more it morphed into something disturbingly biological. No, civilizational. The algorithm mapped progressions, technological thresholds, growth curves, deviance rates, collapse points. It charted evolutionary arcs of societies across cosmic time, not in metaphor, in mathematics. Those numbers weren't abstract, they were diagnostic. One variable stood out, highlighted by repetition, emphasized by the object's own modulation of the signal. A boundary, a threshold, a limit. The algorithm labeled it the red line. Every model we reconstructed hinted the same implication. When a civilization crosses this boundary, something happens, something external. I won't outline the full pattern yet. I need the viewers to absorb what it means before I reveal the conclusion. Because if our interpretation holds, then 3I/ATLAS is not here by coincidence. It was sent, and the message encrypted in its pulse is not merely describing what the red line is, it is telling us what occurs after it is crossed, and the part we have deciphered so far is only the beginning. The rest of the signal, still locked behind layers we have yet to unravel, suggests a purpose far more unsettling than observation. It suggests intervention. The deeper our analysis went, the more 3IATLAS defied the vocabulary of known physics. As soon as we trained JWST's high-resolution spectrograph on it, the data struck me like a blow to the chest. The reflected light did not behave like it should. Its spectral fingerprints refused to match any natural material catalogued across decades of astronomical observations. Even the baseline absorption patterns looked sculpted, edited intentionally, as though the object wanted to hide its true composition, but couldn't help letting a few forbidden wavelengths slip out. Then came the radar returns from the new Arecibo system. I knew before the technicians finished calibrating the echo map that we were no longer dealing with a passive interstellar visitor. The internal structure of 3I/ATLAS was layered, compartmentalized, with densities fluctuating dramatically from region to region. But what froze every scientist in the room was a cluster of readings so high they broke our computational models. The algorithms flagged them as errors. When we rewrote the code to expand the theoretical limits, the numbers refused to budge. They remained impossible, declaring themselves loudly, defiantly, as though mocking our understanding of matter. The only comparison I could make was to hypothetical ultra-dense islands, theorized in speculative papers, localized knots of exotic material stabilized by forces we cannot yet generate. These pockets didn't behave like neutron star matter, nor like quark condensates, nor like any recognized exotic phase. They were simply anomalous, designed to be anomalous. Anchors, braces, load-bearing cores, each one meticulously placed like the ribs of a cathedral built by hands that understand physics with a fluency we can only envy. When I presented the density reconstruction to my team, the room fell silent. Not because the data was unbelievable, but because it was unmistakably deliberate. Nature does not engineer selective reinforcement. Nature does not choose structural symmetry that optimizes signal emission. Nature does not embed pockets of reality-defying substance into a lattice that can withstand interstellar stresses while maintaining precision orientation during acceleration. But intelligence does. The more we examined it, the clearer its purpose became. This was not debris. This was not a fragment. It was architecture. The signal we detected earlier began to make more sense in this context. The algorithm hidden within the faint modulation was not simply describing thresholds of civilization. It was synchronized with the structural design of the object. The pockets of ultra-dense material corresponded to specific mathematical nodes in the encoded sequence. It was as if the object itself embodied the algorithm physically, turning theory into a machine, a device, a mechanism we have not yet identified. There was something else, something we noticed only after aligning the signal phases with the internal radar map. A secondary modulation buried so deeply within the noise floor that it took 3 independent confirmations before I trusted it. This second layer conveyed neither telemetry nor mathematical mapping. It resembled an activation key, not active, not engaged, but dormant, waiting. Waiting for what? The spectroscopic anomalies hinted that 3IATLAS was absorbing and re-emitting solar energy in a way that suggested calibration, as if it were tuning itself to our star. When the object reached perihelion, the amplitude of the second modulation rose by an infinitesimal amount, too small to notice casually, yet too intentional to dismiss. It felt like the object was testing environmental conditions, checking parameters, verifying that the system it entered matched the criteria encoded in the algorithm. I ran the correlation models through our supercomputer array, and the results unsettled even me. The structure of 3IATLAS and the embedded algorithm were coupled. The object was not only a messenger, it was adapted to interpret the data around it, to evaluate the technological state of any civilization it encountered. The red line was not theoretical, it was measurable, and though I will not yet reveal the variable it focused on most intensely, I will say this. The part of the signal we still cannot decode behaves like a sealed gate, a lockbox of intent, a final instruction set that remains hidden until a civilization meets whatever criteria its creators designated. We have not opened that gate, but 3I/ATLAS is already determining whether we should. The moment we isolated the dormant modulation, the character of the investigation shifted. What we once thought was a faint artifact in the noise revealed itself as a structured transmission, so delicate it seemed afraid of being heard, yet so deliberate it demanded interpretation. For weeks our teams locked ourselves inside the signal lab, stripping away cosmic interference, digital compression artifacts, even the subtle harmonics from Earth's own communication satellites. What remained was a pulse, slow, recursive, layered, encoded not in any linguistic framework, but in logic, pure logic. When we finally penetrated the first barrier of the algorithm, what emerged was not a message in the traditional sense. It was a blueprint, a model of civilizational evolution laid out with astonishing precision, charting how cultures rise, innovate, expand, destabilize, and ultimately confront the boundary that the algorithm labeled as the red line. A line beyond which exponential growth becomes indistinguishable from self-destruction. The mathematics were merciless. They predicted collapse not as catastrophe, but as inevitability, unless external correction intervened. The deeper we descended into the code, the more we realized something far more unsettling. The algorithm wasn't describing hypothetical civilizations. It was mapping us, our energy consumption curve, our environmental degradation arc, our militarization trends, our accelerating technological autonomy. Humanity's trajectory fit the pattern too perfectly to ignore. It was as if 3IATLAS had been watching us long before it arrived. Then came the discovery that silenced the room. Embedded within the blueprint was a second layer, time-stamped, encrypted, and locked behind a complexity barrier we still cannot crack. But the fragments we've managed to reconstruct point to an instruction set, a decision tree, a trigger, a sleeping directive boban, awaiting the moment a civilization crosses the red line. I will not pretend the implications are comforting. The creators of 3IATLAS weren't offering guidance. They weren't sending a greeting. They were monitoring, evaluating, preparing. As we aligned the unresolved segments of the message with the object's internal architecture, a chilling hypothesis emerged. 3IATLAS is not a passive recorder. It is an instrument, one capable of reacting to its findings. And the dormant directive we cannot yet decode may not remain dormant forever. There is a final segment of the transmission, one so deeply buried that every attempt to extract it has failed. But one thing is certain, whatever that hidden message contains, it was not meant to reassure us. When we fed the decoded sections of the algorithm into our supercomputer arrays, the simulations produced outcomes none of us were prepared to confront. The models revealed a consistency so precise, so eerily deliberate, that I felt as though 3IATLAS itself were guiding the calculations. Each projection outlined the same conclusion. The object's trajectory was not fixed. It was adjustable, not by natural perturbations or solar tides, but by internal mechanisms we still cannot identify, mechanisms capable of altering its path with microscopic precision. For days, we tested alternative models, hoping to find an error, a misinterpreted parameter, anything to suggest that the object's motion was passive. Instead, the simulations exposed something far more disturbing. 3IATLAS possessed the ability to initiate orbital redirection events targeting large bodies within a star system. It could manipulate trajectories, not wildly, not bluntly, but with the cold efficiency of a surgeon cutting along a predetermined line. One particular model triggered an uneasy silence during our team briefing. When the object approached a gravitational resonance point near Jupiter, its course could be shifted by a fraction of a degree, just enough to redirect a major asteroid from the outer belt toward an inner planet, toward us. The computational thresholds aligned with the nodes in the algorithm we'd already identified. It was as though the object held a checklist of conditions under which intervention would be activated. But the most terrifying scenario came from the energy analysis. We observed fluctuations within the exotic density pockets that matched theoretical predictions for controlled gamma-ray release, a concept we once dismissed as impossible. If the creators of this object engineered a mechanism to trigger a localized gamma-ray burst, even a mild one, its consequences for Earth would be catastrophic. Not planetary destruction in the cinematic sense, but a precise sterilization of technological capacity, communications, power infrastructure, atmospheric chemistry disruptions, enough to collapse civilization without extinguishing the biosphere. A reset. The algorithm's red line was not philosophical, it was operational. The more we matched the structural data with the encoded logic, the clearer the intent became. 3I/ATLAS was not designed to destroy indiscriminately. It was designed to evaluate and, if necessary, correct. A cosmic enforcement mechanism, a gatekeeper. As we pushed our models further, tracking how 3I/ATLAS processed solar output, planetary magnetic fields, and human-made electromagnetic signatures, the threat shifted from theoretical to immediate. The object was learning, comparing, updating its internal parameters with every passing hour, and every update brought it closer to determining whether our civilization had crossed the threshold defined by its creators. I found myself staring at the output visualizations long after the team left the lab. The projections pulsed on the screen, arcs of possible futures converging into a narrow band of outcomes. None of them looked accidental. 3I/ATLAS wasn't drifting. It wasn't observing passively. It was deciding. And though the final directive hidden inside the encrypted signal remains locked to us, the models suggest one truth we can no longer ignore. The object is preparing for something. Whether that something is a test, a warning, or a judgment, we are running out of time to find out. When the simulations reached a threshold we could no longer ignore, global silence followed. The scientific community realized that 3I/ATLAS had transitioned from anomaly to existential variable, and its continued acceleration toward the inner solar system demanded a unified response. Governments, agencies, research institutions, normally fragmented, competitive, hesitant, moved with a clarity born from fear. Within days, the Alpha Summit convened, a gathering of leaders and scientists brought together under a single mandate. Understand the object, and if possible, neutralize the threat it posed. I was invited to the summit not to reassure anyone, but to explain precisely why reassurance was no longer an option. Inside a windowless chamber, surrounded by military advisors and heads of space agencies, I laid out the evidence, the impossible density pockets, the encoded algorithm, the latent directive, the simulation results that pointed toward a narrow decision tree. 3I/ATLAS was not a drifting relic, it was a sentry, a device built to evaluate civilizations and enforce a threshold that its creators believed essential for galactic stability. The question none of us wanted to say aloud finally surfaced. What happens if it decides we've crossed the red line? The room fell still. What could I answer? The truth was simple. We didn't know, but the models implied consequences ranging from orbital manipulation to controlled gamma events, scenarios designed not to annihilate a planet, but to halt a civilization's trajectory with surgical precision. Humanity would continue, but our progress would not. The summit's consensus was swift and sobering. A countermeasure program would begin immediately, the Interstellar Object Counteroffensive, or IOCO. Its objective, intercept 3I/ATLAS before it could activate whatever directive lay dormant within its structure. But any physical strike risked triggering the directive prematurely. This was not merely a technological challenge, it was an existential gamble. My task was to determine whether the encrypted segments of the algorithm contained a method of communication, some way to signal back to the object, to convince it we were not a threat requiring correction. If we could show intent, restraint, or awareness beyond the destructive arcs predicted by the algorithm, perhaps we could interrupt the evaluation cycle. Perhaps that was the test. For days, I studied the hidden segments of the transmission, searching for a pattern that resembled a dialogue key. If such a key existed, it remained buried. Yet one detail haunted me. The algorithm's recursive structure mirrored not a command protocol, but a question posed to every civilization it encountered. Can you demonstrate maturity without force? That question echoed in every line of code, every structural node inside 3I/ATLAS. And now it echoed inside the summit halls as the IOCO teams prepared designs for energy-based countermeasures using principles we barely understood. We were building tools in the dark, aiming at a device built by minds far older, far more disciplined than ours. I looked at the final simulation outputs one last time before presenting them to the summit. The future fanned out in branching threads: catastrophe, paralysis, survival. But one thread, narrow and faint, suggested the possibility of a different outcome. Not victory, not defeat, recognition. If we could decode the remaining encrypted layer, if we could respond not with aggression but comprehension, perhaps 3IATLAS would stand down. Perhaps that was the only proof its creators sought, that we could approach the precipice of power without stepping blindly past it. The red line was never about destruction. It was about who we choose to become when we stand before it. And now, as 3IATLAS drifts closer with each passing hour, the final question remains suspended before humanity. Will we cross the threshold, or will we prove that we are ready to rise beyond it?